Welcome to So and So, brought to you by Bernina, made to create. I'm Meg Goodman, and you're about to enjoy a casual conversation with a special member of the sewist and quilting community. A conversation about how they got started, what inspires them, what excites them, and their connection to this community. Today we're reuniting with one of our guests from Season 1, or to be more specific, 70 episodes ago. We're catching up today with Dr. Karen Nyberg, a retired astronaut who is currently pursuing interests in textile art and design in the areas of conservation and sustainability. As a reminder, Karen received her undergraduate degree in mechanical engineering from the University of North Dakota and graduate degrees also in mechanical engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. She was selected as a member of the NASA Astronaut Corps in 2000, and as the 50th woman in space, she made her first trip to space aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery in 2008 during the height of the International Space Station construction. On her second space flight in 2013, Karen launched in a Russian Soyuz spacecraft and lived and worked at ISS for 166 days. Karen lives in Park City, Utah with her husband, astronaut Doug Hurley, their teenage son, Jack, and their two amazing dogs, Leo and Luke. Hi, Karen, and welcome back to So and So.
Hi, Meg. I'm so excited to be back. I'm glad you invited me back, and I'm looking forward to catching up.
Well, you've been busy, and as we were talking when we first met, we were in the pandemic. Now we're out of the pandemic and full speed ahead, and you are certainly full speed ahead on everything that you're doing. Um, we'll talk about what's going on since we first met. But to bring those who are with us today who haven't met you yet, and by the way, Karen was on episode 11 of So and So. So to bring them up to speed, will you tell us why and how you learned to sew?
My mom used to sew all the time. I'm one of six children, and she did a lot of sewing, our clothes, snowmobile suits, prom dresses when we were in high school. And apparently, I was asking her all the time from a young age, can I sew? Can I sew? Can I use the machine? Can I? And so I was probably about six when she taught me. And and I just used to sew all the time. And then she started working at this fabric store in our tiny little town. They opened a fabric store, and she started working there probably around my junior high days. And and so I would go and be able to buy, reduced price fabric. And so in the summers, I would buy one pattern and a bunch of fabrics and make like 10 pairs of shorts out of the same pattern. And um, anyway, I just used to sew all the time, and it was my mom that got me into it.
And did she teach you along the way, or did she just kind of give you things and say, "Hey, figure this out"? Or what was kind of her style in teaching you?
I think she just kind of taught me along the way. And I remember, and I think I would just kind of go at it too. And then she taught me the basics. And then I remember when I would have struggles with the machine, like everybody does at the beginning when something gets stuck or the thread gets tangled.
Mm-hmm.
And, I remember times she'd be outside on a ladder washing the windows, and I'd come out, Mom, how do I, how do I do this? What happened? This happened. So I think it was her just kind of helping me through the challenges as they came along.
Now, you picked up skills, different things to learn that you learned when you were learning to sew. Were any of those applicable as you went on your journey to become an astronaut?
I think probably so. And part of that might be part of the patience of working with a machine and having the struggles and working through it. I think that's huge. But I think almost more so, sewing for me was an outlet away from like my engineering, and that sort of thing. It was creative time. It was um, just kind of my way to relax. And so I think that almost more so was what was useful for me, through my education and my career.
So you trained as a mechanical engineer, a couple of degrees in that area. and then you went into the space program. How did that happen?
Well, about the time I was learning to sew, I also started proclaiming that I wanted to be an astronaut when I grow up.
Hmm.
And I don't know exactly how that came about, potentially because that was about the same time NASA selected the first female astronauts, and they were designing the space shuttle. And so there was probably a lot in the news. And so I had this dream, and I just started following that passion. Every decision I made about going to school and what I would study and that sort of thing. And also the motivation of I need to work hard because I have to get good grades. I have to be my best in order to make this dream come true. And so I just followed it through and went all the way through graduate school. And then I had an internship at NASA when I was an undergraduate. And when I finished graduate school, they hired me as an engineer. And then the application in 1999, the application process came out. They were selecting a class in the year 2000 of astronauts. And so I put in my application, and lo and behold, here I am.
And one day you looked out and you were in space.
Yep. It's amazing.
So when you lived in and worked on the space station, and this was in 2013, you took a small amount of sewing supplies and you sewed in space in your free time. What did you make?
Well, I made a couple different things. Not as many things as I thought I would. The time goes so fast, and there's so much going on. But we did have, since I was there for 5.5 months, of course you have weekends and some free time, and that's why I brought the sewing supplies with me, because sometimes people will bring hobbies, and I didn't want to just watch TV, watch movies. I wanted to do something. But time was limited, and I also found it a little bit challenging to get myself deep into my creative space when I was there. And I think because I would have like an hour here or an hour there. And for me to really get creative, I need like a long period of time with no distractions. And I just didn't have that up there. And so I didn't do as much as I'd hoped, but I made a quilt block, a star themed quilt block, and I didn't have a plan before I went. I just started making it. And so it's not the most beautiful quilt block ever, but it did turn into an amazing project where um, we put out a call for people to submit star themed quilt blocks, a call around the world, and it was this astronomical quilts block challenge, is what it was called, run by Quilts Inc. and NASA, and we received over 2,400 blocks from around the
Oh
world,
my.
and put together these amazing collection of 28 quilts that volunteers stitched together and quilted. And so it turned into an amazing project. All I got done was that one quilt block for that project, but it is in one of the quilts. I also made I had one day where we were supposed to be working on a Sunday. There was a cargo vehicle that had been launched, and we were supposed to use the robotic arm and capture it that day, and they delayed that capture. And so I had already finished my exercise, and everything else that I would have done that day was canceled. And so I had zero to do. And I think that was the only day where I felt unencumbered and was able to get into this creative space.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my goals was to also upcycle some materials from space station to make something. And so I had been collecting this fabric from that lined the Russian food containers. My commander Fyodor had been giving me some of it, and I used that time then in my creative space and drew out a dinosaur for my son, who was 3 at the time and in love with dinosaurs. And I made a dinosaur for him, and I cut up an old T-shirt that was about to be thrown away, because we don't wash clothes. We just, after we're done using it, we just throw it out. and and so I made a dinosaur for him, stuffed it with this old T-shirt, and so that was probably my most creative thing. And then one more thing that I did make, I used again some of that fabric from the Russian food containers, and some a red, a white, and a blue old T-shirt, and I made a Texas flag for my husband, because we had met in Texas and married in Texas and had our son in Texas. So those are the 3 items that I actually finished and made when I was there.
Where are each of those items now?
The quilt block is in one of the quilts. They're being stored at the Briscoe Center at the University of Texas, and those actually will be out. That one will be out display later in the year. I think we'll probably talk about that today. And then the dinosaur is in a shadow box in our house here right now.
Mm-hmm.
The Texas flag. We moved from Texas to Utah in about not quite 2 years ago, and a lot of our stuff, we're renting a house right now. A lot of our stuff is in storage, and the Texas flag is in storage somewhere. So we don't have that out on display right now, but it's here with us in Utah.
And everything's still kind of in your orbit as it will.
Yes.
So, is sewing in space any different than sewing here on Earth?
Yes, it is, and part of what I did in space, I wasn't prepared properly for a number of reasons. I didn't have a lot of supplies with me. I didn't have a plan. Cutting fabric was probably the biggest difference and the hardest part because you can't lay anything down. And so, like here, if I'm cutting quilt blocks, I have a mat and a rotary cutter and a straight edge, and it's or even cutting with scissors, you usually lay it down and cut along a straight, but you can't lay anything down. And so, I think one thing you can do to try to mimic that is hold a piece of fabric in front of you in the air and cut it. And that's what it's like trying to cut fabric in space. And also I did not have fabric scissors with me. I didn't think to bring those. And so I had to use scissors that were available on space station, and they were not good at all. They were quite horrible, to be honest. And so cutting the fabric was tricky. And then, and I just hand stitched, which I'm not great at. I don't do it a lot here. So that is not really any different than hand stitching on Earth, but I just wasn't great at it. And I also did not bring any pins. I had a set of about 5 needles, and so I used some of those needles to pin fabric together. So there were challenges like that, and a lot of it, I think the hardest, like I said, the hardest thing without having gravity is the cutting of the fabric. The rest of it is not. Now, if we had a sewing machine in space, I don't know how that would work either without gravity. I think there would have to be, there'd be a lot of design challenges to make it work.
So there's a suggestion for future missions, and I think it would be interesting for our listeners to do what you said, try that and see what the difference is.
Yeah.
Karen, you were the first person to sew in space. Do you know if anyone's done so since?
I don't think so. Now, actually, we do have a sewing kit on board. It's more of a heavy-duty industrial mending kit, and people have used that, and I'm sure somebody used that before me. And during my mission, I actually took a picture of my crewmate Chris Cassidy had a hole in his weightlifting gloves. We have an exercise device that's not really weightlifting because we're in 0G, but it's a resistive exercise device where we can mimic weightlifting. And he had a hole in his weightlifting gloves. And I walked in one day or floated in, I didn't walk in, to find him stitching up his weightlifting glove. And I'm like, oh, this is so great. I need to get a picture of you sewing in space.
So maybe you can share that with us then on the website for this episode.
Yeah, I'll definitely look for it. I will look for it for sure.
So thank you for bringing us up to speed and refreshing a few of the things that have happened. And now I'd like to get into updating to what you've been up to since our last visit. First of all, your textile artwork and quilts are now being featured in an exhibition at the National Quilt Museum in Paducah, Kentucky. And it's called The Stars Are Aligned by Karen Nyberg. Would you walk us through this exhibit and pick out a few of your works to highlight for us?
Absolutely. So that is that astronomical quilts block challenge. There will be a couple quilts from that challenge that will be on display. So the quilt that has my block in it will be on display. And there are also 2 quilts that have never been displayed yet. When people from around the world submitted these blocks, some of them were not cut exactly to the 9.5 inch to make a 9-inch square. Some of them were not conducive to being stitched together just into a quilt. And so one of the volunteers, Stacy Menard, one of the NASA employees who volunteered, kept those blocks and ended up stitching them into two more quilts. And
Mm.
so that's really exciting. So anybody who had submitted a block and their block wasn't in a quilt, now it will be in a quilt. Um, so those will be on display. And I think there was one that was a child's quilt. So any of the quilt blocks that were obviously made by a child, there were some that were drawn with markers, and that was made into one quilt as well, the children's quilt. So I believe that's going to be there. And then so it'll be astronomical quilts, and then some of my artwork, a few of my uh, wall hanging quilted uh, artworks, and then a couple of the quilts that I designed that use my fabric collections, my Earth Views fabric collections, and my new Orbital Sunrise fabric collection. So there'll probably be at least one of each of those quilts. And so for my artwork, it'll be this one that I named End of an Era, which is an image of the last shuttle launch. The portrait of my husband, Doug Hurley, who was the commander of the first SpaceX Dragon crewed flight, that will be there, and a few others.
Was was there a certain overriding inspiration that you had when you were deciding what was when you were curating this collection to be exhibited?
For the astronomical quilts, it's actually the 10-year anniversary of that project.
Hmm.
In 2013 is when I made the block in space. So last year was the 10-year anniversary of that. And 2014 then is when people were submitting their blocks and when the volunteers were stitching them together. And it was the Houston International Quilt Festival in 2014 when they were first on display, all 28 of the quilts. And so the 10-year anniversary of that was definitely a driver in wanting to get them out again for people to see. And then basically the space related part of it with our works that I've done because of my career, obviously, was a driving factor for selection.
So you have a conversation. I'm going to say get a call from to be specific. You talk to the people at the National Quilt Museum who are wonderful. They've been on this podcast. They will be again in the future, and they say, "Hey, Karen Nyberg, we want to feature some of your things, your creations, in our museum." From that initial conversation to where it is today on exhibit, how long does that take?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm trying to recall when we first started talking to them. I honestly don't know that I know the answer to that. I can't remember when we first had the conversation. If it's been, and you know how time goes. It's
Oh,
like
indeed.
I could say, oh, it was 2 months ago, and find out, oh wait, that was 12 months ago.
Sure.
I don't remember. I'm thinking in the last 6 months was our
Uh-huh.
first conversation, but I don't remember exactly.
How long will everything be on display? It starts in March and goes until when?
It goes until July,
Okay.
and I don't remember the specific dates, but it's March through July, so it'll be there for a while.
Well, we'll look forward on this podcast to being there in person and talking about that. Um, in addition to all of this, last fall you released two new original works of textile art, which celebrates women in space history, and it was at the Kennedy Space Center. Tell us about these creations and why they're important.
I did two portraits. One was Valentina Tereshkova, who was the first woman. She was a Russian cosmonaut, or is a Russian cosmonaut. She launched the anniversary of her launch to space was 60 years last summer. And then the second portrait is Sally Ride, the first American female to launch into space. And the anniversary of her flight was 40 years last summer. And so I really wanted to commemorate what they've done by doing a portrait. And they really mean a lot because I remember studying about Valentina when I was in school, in high school. I did a report on her one time because I wanted to be an astronaut. And I was just very inspired by her and her story. And I actually got to meet her
Mm,
in Star City, Russia, before my launch on the Russian Soyuz. And so that was pretty amazing. I didn't really get to have a conversation with her because my conversational Russian was very poor,
hmm
and I think her English is, she speaks English, but it's just hard to have a really deep conversation with somebody when you're trying to overcome the language barriers. But it was really a pleasure to meet her. And then Sally Ride, of course, I think the selection of her and the other women in 1978 as astronauts was huge for me in forming my dreams and my goals, and to watch her launch in space. And I unfortunately never did get to meet Sally. I met her sister, and which was great, but I didn't get to meet her before she
hmm
passed away. But inspiring women definitely helped forge my dreams and put me on the path to what I ended up getting to do.
It's a nice way to honor that. Karen, you have a partnership with a textile recycler, and I know that this is very important to you. Tell us about them and this project.
Yes, Awesome Tex is the name of them. And so their CEO and founder, Patricia Ermecchio, I met her through Instagram of all places years ago. And at the time, they were they were working on with Nike on the fabric for the Nike Space Hippie, which is their shoe that is some percent recycled materials. I don't remember. It's a high percentage. And so their fabric is actually the upper for the Space Hippie shoe. And what they do, she found a way after seeing clothing waste and how much clothing goes to landfills. She developed a way to basically upcycle that clothing into usable yarn and fabrics. And I was just totally blown away by when I first met her, what she had done and come up with. And they've been working really hard. They recently opened a factory in Miami. So now there's a factory in the United States for upcycling clothing or all fabric.
hmm
And so one thing we talked about is, I mentioned to them that quilters waste a lot of fabric, all the scraps from cutting and that sort of thing. And so we're working on a program called Scrap Cycle. And if you go to the Osom Brand website, I can't remember I need to look up the website, their actual name of the website, and we can maybe put it with the information.
Yes, we will.
Um, and there's a program called Scrap Cycle where you can subscribe. They will send 3 bags a year or whatever subscription you end up getting. And you basically fill it up with your scraps and send it back, and they'll recycle it. And, I just hope that it's a new thing now. And hopefully it just becomes more and more kind of the norm, like other recycling has, in order to recycle clothing and fabric scraps and keep them out of landfills.
I know several of our previous guests on this podcast have talked about fabric waste from fast fashion and the area it takes up in landfills. So we'll make sure that we provide this. It's OSOM Textile Brand. Scrap Cycle is the name of the program, and we will feature their contact information on the website. Karen, we've talked about, and we're going to go into another topic altogether, but I want to make sure I've caught up on everything that you've been up to since we talked last. Have we covered all of it?
We did. We haven't talked about my fabric lines, and I can't remember if we talked about Earth Views when we first talked, but my first fabric line with Robert Kauffman Fabrics, Earth Views, is now kind of we're past that, and so, but that was basically a fabric line that we it was 30 SKUs of fabrics from pictures I had taken from space on the space station of Earth. And then my second fabric line just came into stores about a month ago or at the beginning of this year. And It's called Orbital Sunrise, and it's a line of batiks, which I'm really excited about because I was given the name. I took the colors kind of from a sunrise as seen from space, where there's some oranges and reds and yellows, and along with the earthy tones of blues and greens and a few browns. And I have a few quilt patterns with that as well. So I'm really excited about the new batik line, and um, I'm actually trying to create or reuse the patterns from my Earth Views lines with the
Hmm.
with the batiks as well.
You've been busy, very busy.
I've been having a lot of fun.
It sounds like it. So I'm going to go to a different topic altogether. After you and I recorded your last podcast, we were talking informally, and I shared with you that my dream as a little girl was to be an astronaut. And then you were gracious enough to answer some questions for me, and that was pretty awesome. And I'd like to share a couple of those questions with everyone who's listening to us, because I'm guessing there might be more people out there who may have shared this dream. So, first of all, what does it take to be an astronaut?
Well, there are definitely basic requirements. A degree in some STEM field is a basic requirement. A master's degree is a requirement now. It used to be just a bachelor's degree, but we were getting so many applications. One year we got 18,000 applications, which is a lot of work to go through.
Wow.
And so now a master's degree is a basic requirement as well. So really, it's not, I mean, the basic requirements are not that, it's a STEM degree and a master's. And then I think it's like so many, I can't remember, so many years of applicable work after your degree or a doctorate degree, like or advanced education.
Hmm.
So those are the basic requirements. And then beyond that, I've been on the astronaut selection board 3 times now where I've looked at applications and I've helped interview people. And so um, from the perspective of somebody who's helping to select astronauts, the things that we really look for are people that have demonstrated team skills, demonstrated operational skills, meaning, operating aircraft. And you don't have to be a pilot, but those types of skills where maybe you've worked in a lab where you've had to do some type of applicable operational skill. Um, and then also people who have demonstrated they can uh, live in kind of adverse conditions and thrive in adversity and um, or austere conditions.
Hmm.
um, People who can push through difficulties. You know, if you're a marathon runner, if you've scuba dived, if you've um, if you've gone to Antarctica, if you've camped a lot, if you've mountain climbed, if you've those types of things, and you don't have to do all those. It's just demonstrating who you are, and then also a lot. What it really comes down to, on paper, people can look really good and have all the degrees, all of the the education that's needed. They can have superior you know, things that they've done and amazing things. But if they come into the interview and they're just not good people and you wouldn't want to live with them for 6 months in a can, then
Uh-huh.
and so that is huge too, just being a good person. So that's kind of the things that the basic requirements plus the things that kind of make a person appealing as an astronaut.
And then there's all of the training that you have to go through to be physically fit and to be in space.
Yeah, we start once you're selected as an astronaut, there's a 2-year program where you're called an astronaut candidate, and you go through basically like when I started, we were still flying the space shuttle and we had just started flying or were about to fly on the International Space Station. And so we had to learn both of those vehicles in and out, how to operate them. And then also we have to learn to do spacewalks, and we have to learn to operate the robotic arm, and we have to learn to do the different science that we might do on board. We had to learn the Russian language. Um, and so yeah, there's a lot of that. And then after that 2 years of that basic training, then we're officially an astronaut and officially eligible to be assigned to a space flight. And then you continue that training and do some more advanced training in all those areas until you're assigned to a space flight. And then you train for the specific flight that you will be flying.
So, what's it like to blast off from Earth and ultimately live in space?
Oh, it's so amazing. It's so amazing. And for you, as somebody who wanted to be an astronaut, you would love it.
Hmm.
It's launch day. A lot of people ask on launch day, "Are you nervous? What's it like?" And I wouldn't say nervous is the right word because the training is so in depth and you train so much. And on launch day, there's mostly thoughts. There's a lot of you're anxious. It's kind of like a Christmas morning
Hmm.
anxious.
Hmm.
But you have a job to do, and there's a lot of deep thought about the job that you have to get done. Not screwing it up is huge, but the launch is exhilarating. I got to launch on both the space shuttle and a Russian Soyuz. The space shuttle is much larger, um, so two different experiences, but very similar as well. But yeah, so you just it's exhilarating. You accelerate from on the launch pad, and 8.5 minutes later, you're going 17,500 miles per hour. And so if you can imagine, and then the next thing you know, you're weightless.
Hmm.
And yeah, I remember that exact moment after my shuttle flight or the launch. I had a job to do. I had to get out of my seat and take pictures of the external tank as it floated back to Earth below us. And so I had to quickly learn how to maneuver in zero gravity and take off my gloves and my helmet, try to get them in a bag that was floating around like a jellyfish, and get the camera that somebody brought from the mid deck and take the pictures. And when I finished that task and I finally had a chance, I remember I turned around and looked into the cockpit at my colleagues who were still working, sitting up in the front, and I was just like, wow, I did it. This dream I had, I almost had a tear in my eye at that point because I'm like, this dream I had from the time I was a little girl, I did it. I'm here.
Thank you for sharing that with us. It's something so few will ever experience, but the way you talked about it, it's like we were there with you. So thank you for that. I want to talk about your family a little bit. Your husband, Doug Hurley, who you mentioned earlier, is also an astronaut, and he flew on that SpaceX Crew Dragon demo. It was actually televised. I remember watching that and thinking how cool the new spacesuits are. That was in May of 2020. You also mentioned your son Jack earlier, who is a teenager. Does he want to follow in yours and Doug's footsteps?
I don't think so, although he has shown a little bit more interest in airplanes lately. My husband was in the Marine Corps. He flew F-18s in the Marine Corps. And Jack has shown more interest in airplanes and has talked about flying a couple times. But he was, like I said, when he was 3, interested in dinosaurs, and he was been interested in paleontology for a really, really long time. And I think he still is, but his interests are broadening, as probably happens at that age. And he's very good at history. He's also very good at graphic arts. So who knows where he'll go? But the space astronaut thing, he has shown very little interest in his whole life.
So, does he currently, or does he want to learn to sew?
He has mentioned he does not know how now. He did mention it one time when he actually, I say he did. He did learn in school last year in 7th grade. They had, which I think is incredible. So they have a course where part of the year it was they did some cooking and they did do some sewing, so he did get to do a little bit of sewing.
Hmm.
But when I've talked to him and asked him if he wants me to show him, he has not shown interest. He did talk one time about wanting to make a flag. He had this idea for a flag that he wanted to make, and so I thought for a second that maybe I could get him at my sewing machine, but it never materialized.
Well, he's young. There's one day he may surprise you, right?
He might.
Karen, after all you've been up to recently, what's next for you?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm hoping so. So right now I'm kind of into this new fabric line and trying to use that in some new making some more quilts. I'm hoping to start a new textile art piece. I have a couple ideas. I haven't really formalized any ideas, but I need to get into my creative space for that I talked about before,
Mm-hmm.
without my distractions. And hopefully I can find that creative space and get a new textile art. I've really enjoyed doing portraits. And I used to, when I was growing up, I used to draw a lot as well with pencil, charcoal, and I used to love to do portraits. And so I think in the quilting world, I really have been enjoying that as well. So I have a couple ideas, and I'm hoping to find the space for that in my head to create it. Um, and then also, I'm hoping, we're talking with Robert Kauffman about what's next, a new fabric line coming in the next year or so. So um, hopefully that will happen as well.
We'll look forward to that. Is there anything I didn't ask you today that you wish I had?
Oh, gosh, no, it's been a great conversation. Yeah, I've loved talking to you.
Yeah, we really appreciate you joining us again, Karen. If our listeners want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, I have a website, karennyberg.com, um, and there's a way to contact in there. And then also I'm on Instagram at AstroKarenN and Facebook at astronaut Karen Nyberg, I think is the name there. So yeah, those places are probably the best.
Perfect. Thank you again, Karen, so very much for joining us today.
It was great talking to you again, Meg.
Well, there you have it, another story about someone just like you, someone for whom sewing and quilting is so much more than a hobby. It's a way of life and a connection to something much bigger. If you know someone you think has an outstanding story, a story that should be shared on this podcast, please drop me a note to meg@soandsopodcast.com or complete the form on our website. Be sure to subscribe to, rate, and review this podcast on your favorite platform, and visit our website, soandsopodcast.com, for more information about today's and all of our guests. That's SEWANDSO podcast.com. And finally, I want to thank Bernina for making this program possible. I'm Meg Goodman, and I look forward to you joining us next time on So and So.